Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Inside.net. My name is Celso Phillip, and I'm joined by my good friend and host, Rodney Littles II. So today, we're going to have a very interesting conversation with our friend Shaun here. And so Shaun is like the maintainer, the founder, the benevolent dictator for life of a really interesting project called Oqtane. And, I'm really curious to see how Oqtane helps us solve some of these problems that we might have when we're talking about building applications with like Blazor and Maui and Xamarin and like some of these other types of things. But before we do that, like Shaun, why don't we start off with you just telling folks a little bit about who you are and a little bit about what you do.
All right. Yeah. So I am Shaun Walker. I've been software developer for almost 30 years now, I guess, mainly in the Microsoft ecosystem. I've been a Microsoft MVP for, probably 14 years now. I had various stints where I was an MVP and then I wasn't, and then I became an MVP again. I guess my claim to fame is that I was the original creator of an open source project called .NET Nuke. That was one of the original .NET open source applications that I built way back in 2002, 2003. Formed a company around that open source project in 2006. We got venture capital funding, went through 3 rounds of venture capital funding, and eventually I left that company in 2014. And went back to consulting, mainly around Microsoft technology. And then, so more recently, I created another open source project in 2018. And that's the one that you mentioned off the start there. That's called Oqtane. Essentially, it would be, I guess, classified as the modern version of what I did the first time when I created .NET New. Both of them are web application frameworks that developers can use to accelerate the construction of web applications.
Awesome. And so I remember .NET Nuke from back when I was doing web forms applications, right? Like I feel like it has that much of a rich history of being in the .NET community. And from my perspective, .NET Nuke was like a CMS. At least that's the way that I understood it to be. Like it was a CMS, and it allowed us to build, and again, for folks that don't know, like a content management system. And so it helped us build those applications that, again, like I needed to pull content from somewhere, but then I didn't want to like hard code it into my application. And I wanted to have like a more robust way of having those types of things. So I'm definitely interested to kind of diving in and learning a little bit about one, how, you went from .NET Nuke to Oqtane, but then also too, what are some of the things that Oqtane has that maybe .NET Nuke developers might be familiar with, or it might be able to reuse some of those existing skill sets. So definitely want to talk about that. But before we do, really quick, I'm just going to share my screen. And why don't we talk about a couple of updates about things that have been going on in the community. I'm going to share my screen. That is not the screen I want to share. Here we go. So here's my screen. So I think in January, so we're in March now. This is like the first day of March. So about 2 months ago, the .NET Foundation had a DNF summit, and I believe there were like tons of folks and talks and things like that. Like I wasn't there and I didn't see it, but Shaun, I believe you were, right? And did you do a presentation and were part of what happened?
I did. Yeah, it was actually only the second, I think, dedicated virtual event that the foundation has hosted. Okay. And it's typically focused around the .NET open source projects, which are part of the foundation. So the different maintainers get the opportunity to present information about their projects so that, the .NET community can learn more about them. In this particular event, I created a keynote presentation for it, which was focused more on open source sustainability.
Got it.
And the challenges around how open source maintainers can achieve sustainability for their projects, because that seems to be a topic that's talked about a lot lately. Is there seems to be a lot of talk about maintainer burnout, right? So people who are developing open source projects and they don't have the resources available to help them do that in a more dedicated way, and so they're really struggling. And so usually the perspective is that, how do we get more corporations and companies to pay for these open source projects, right, to help support the maintainers. I took a different approach in my presentation, and I presented it from the perspective of how can maintainers help themselves, create a sustainable business around their open source project. And of course, I took that perspective because I had some experience doing that with the original .NET Nuke project.
Right.
And that's not to say, every open source project will be successful in doing that or taking that approach, but I think it's important for open source maintainers to think about their options, right? Instead of just hoping that something will magically appear and solve all of their problems. So that
Yeah.
presentation was quite well received within the .NET community. It was pretty direct in some ways in terms of pointing, well, like helping provide more transparency about what it's like to be a maintainer, right? Because there's this sort of myth around what it's like to do open source, right? There's this theory that people have, and I don't know where it comes from, but the reality is definitely much different. And I was trying to explain that in terms that people would understand, and it definitely resonated with the maintainers.
Yep. I'm not surprised. Yeah, open source maintainability is a concern for a lot of people in the .NET space. I mean, as we're looking at the deprecation of Xamarin, moving to Maui, there's a lot of people that are concerned about, will this open source project that I've used for, the past 10 years still be there in the new ecosystem, right? And from a business that's built your application on the .NET platform, that's a very big concern, right? And then the question becomes like, is it that maintainer's responsibility? I mean, some of these maintainers that I know have moved on from the .NET ecosystem. So, can you even expect them to come back and build something for you for the future? Yeah. So I'd say it's a pretty interesting topic that we probably just don't talk about enough in the .NET space.
Yeah, and I also, instead of just talking, I guess, around the problems behind it, although I wanted to present that perspective, I also wanted to offer some solutions, right? And so explaining, how you can create a commercial open source enterprise, right, around your open source project. It's not easy to do that, but it's certainly a possibility if you have a large enough community of users. So I think that maintainers hopefully found that useful and might push some in the right direction, right, so that they can achieve sustainability on their own.
Yeah. I think another side of it too, kind of like with Rodney bringing up the Xamarin aspect of it, is hey, I've committed and I've invested time into this thing, and now, and even though it's backed by company X, now it's gone, right? Or it's changed, or it's deprecated for like another thing that might behave and look different, and has a different set of skill sets, and I don't know, I need to go retrain this room of developers that I have for this thing, right? And so even I think it's both sides. It's okay, how do maintainers, one, not burn out, but then also get compensated adequately for their time and effort. But then for me as a consumer of said open source, how can I live with a certain level of certainty that this thing is going to be around for a little while? Maybe not forever, because everyone needs a vacation. I get it, but like for a little while, right? Because I don't want to bet on Project X, and then in 2 years Project X is gone, or it's deprecated, and it's like, okay, well, we're all going to Java. We got to leave this thing. You know what I mean? Like whatever the case is. So I do agree. I think it's a much deeper conversation that we should all have, for sure. I got to make sure I watch your talk because I haven't seen it. I haven't seen any of this.
Okay. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. That was actually the core of my presentation, is that consumers of open source want to mitigate the risks around it, right? The risk of it not being around in the long term, the risk of not having like good support. And that's what maintainers should be providing, is, commercial services around that. That it's a natural fit, but not very many open source maintainers do that today, because they want to just focus on writing the code. So, but then they also complain that, that it's too much of a burden on them if the project gets too popular. So
Yeah.
something's got to change.
Yeah. And like one last point, because I know this is not what we came here to talk about, but I think this is a very important thing to talk about, though. So I do want to like dwell on it for a little bit. I think another perspective too is not to downplay anyone's skill set, but like we're software developers and we're not business people for most of us. And so the idea of, hey, well, I just kind of built this thing because I like building it and it was fun. And I got to work with the people that, I know, my friends and family and whoever, like the colleagues that have come together with me to build this thing. But then, oh, shoot, now I have like, I don't know, 1 million NuGet downloads. I should create some type of entity around this thing. Not solely for the purpose of making money, but solely for the purpose of, hey, let's make sure that this thing is supported because a lot of people are depending on it. So it's almost like a level of responsibility now for me to have some type of business level support. Again, not just to make money, but just to make sure that, hey, all these folks that are running my software, and it could be running in places that I don't even expect, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to do harm to anybody. You know what I mean? It could be running in hospitals. It could be running on airplanes. It could be on the Mars rover getting shot up to the moon. Like, I don't know where it's running. So I want to make sure that it's properly supported. But again, I'm not a business person, right? Like, I don't know what an LLC and an S Corp and taxes and partnerships and, you know, licensing and, you know what I mean? So I again, it's a complicated, it's not complicated, but it's a challenging conversation, right? Because I think there's just a lot of things to think about, like on multiple angles of the conversation.
Yep. Yeah, it actually kind of makes me wonder if there should be an open source business incubator, right, for projects that reach a certain point and need that help to with the business side, right, to get them set up in the right way, just give them the right guidance.
Yeah, like a business basics for developers, right? Like we don't need an MBA, but like give me the tidbits, you know what I mean, so that we can kind of get to it.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. That being said, let's move on. Let's get the people what they're here to talk about.
Because that's not what we're here to talk about, is it?
Right. So super quick. So since we were talking about the .NET Foundation, I decided to click around a little bit on Meetup. And for folks that don't know, the .NET Foundation has, I think it's called a Meetup Pro account. With the Meetup Pro account, what that does is it allows you to have, I'm guessing, I don't know, sub accounts. I guess that's how you say it, like other meetups that are a part of your meetup kind of thing. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because I think a lot of folks, again, now that, you know, we're no longer on shutdown or folks are going outside, it's always a great idea to look around and see what meetups in person folks are doing, right? So I just did a meetup in Jacksonville the other day. It's for She Can Code It, right? A group of women entrepreneurs and developers that are building cool products, right? And so, you know, for folks that are interested, definitely head over to Meetup and even head over to the .NET Foundation Meetup group. It looks like they have 286 groups. So that's 286 global .NET meetups, you know, that are on, I'm guessing, various levels of activity. But definitely head over there and check out and see what folks are doing. And you might even have a meetup that's close by in your area that, you know, might have really interesting folks for you to talk to. So,
yeah, I guess based on my insight of what's going on in the foundation, since I'm in the project committee, all of those user groups that are there, the 286, those are all the most active ones because the foundation went through a process last year of sort of weeding out the ones that were not active. So that represents actually all of the most active groups around the world.
Yeah. Oh, look at this. This map is great. Look at all of these ones that are in Europe. That's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of countries there.
Yeah, that's a lot. There's Australia. I'm guessing this is New Zealand, probably a little bit over there. Africa, Asia. So yeah, again, depending on wherever you are in your world, there's probably a meetup somewhere there for you. So definitely make sure you folks head over and check it out. Okay, so that's it for me. So Shaun, let's circle back around to you. And you know, I always love history lessons, right? Like I love to know like what the genesis of certain things are. So so tell me. And maybe let's not go all the way back because I know you have a couple of projects under your belt. But from .NET Nuke, right? How do we go from .NET Nuke to Oqtane? Like, what was the transition there, and like, why did you think, you know, that was something that needed to happen?
Yeah. So You're right. Like, so the original .NET Nuke application was built on web forms, which was pretty innovative at the time, right? 2001, 2002. That's like the very first version of .NET.
Yeah.
And web forms, really did get a lot of excitement in the developer community because it allowed desktop developers and I guess classic ASP developers to transition to a new platform, right, which had a lot of capability. And so .NET Nuke was quite popular. You mentioned like you classified it as a CMS, and it's interesting because I think that the term CMS is fairly overloaded, meaning like depending on your perspective, right? You classify what a CMS is in different ways. So some people would classify a CMS as being something that is for web publishing, right? For managing web content, maybe has versioning and workflow and those types of capabilities in it. And others might think of a CMS as just a web platform or web framework, which allows you to easily build custom applications, right? Which are usually called modules on various platforms. And that might not have anything to do with so-called content management, right? It might be managing any type of data. So it's interesting because you definitely touched on a topic which people have talked about a lot when it comes to .NET Nuke and Oqtane. Like some people say, well, it's a CMS, and others will say, no, it's a framework. And I guess it's both, or maybe it's neither. I don't know.
It's its own thing.
Yeah. Either way, though, I think it's. I actually registered the domain name blazorcms.net because I think that there is a lot of people that like to classify things as CMSs, right? And so that's basically another URL that you can get to Oqtane with.
Got it.
Yeah.
So then,
but as
do
far
you
as the
do you think
history
about
goes,
it as like the spiritual successor then of .NET Nuke, or is it like, does it do that and more kind of thing?
yeah, so I would say that the world has changed a lot in terms of how to build web applications, right? I think if you ever built applications on web forms, there were certain patterns that you followed, and how we build applications today are much different. But yes, I would say that Octane would essentially be the spiritual successor because it still has a lot of the same concepts that .NET Nuke had, except that they're implemented in a much different way under the covers, right? Using much more modern techniques. And I guess, so, I had that long sort of history with .NET Nuke. And then I guess it was after I left in 2014, I actually didn't do much with .NET Nuke for a few years. I went back and just did standard consulting around like Azure, MVC, and then Angular, React. And so I learned a lot about how modern applications were being developed in a sort of non-web forms world. And then when Blazor came along, I actually got a text message from Scott Hunter that said, have you taken a look at this Blazor thing? It's still in preview, but has a really rich component model around it. It seems to be a technology which you could build a framework around, much like you did with DNN. And so I hadn't looked at it, and so I downloaded it and started to play with it and built a quick proof of concept and quickly realized, yeah, you could build a framework around it, and it was very powerful. And it was really cool because I was never really a big fan of JavaScript, so the ability to build front ends with C# really got my attention. Yeah, and so from there, I basically, was full steam ahead on building a new framework using Blazor as the front end technology, and of course using .NET Core as the back end.
Yeah, you touched on something slightly that I kind of want to dive into, and that is like the programming model of how we build web applications. And I want to touch on it because I feel like we go through these waves, particularly in the web development community, of what is the way that I build the thing, right? And I'll give you an example. If we go back, I don't know, not that long ago, right? And remember when WebSockets first came out? and everyone was like, oh, okay, WebSockets. Like everyone is building WebSocket enabled things, right? Like on the node, it was Socket.io. We had Blazor. Like everyone had a thing. There was Comet. There was stuff, right? But it was oh, okay. There's WebSockets. Then then somewhere in intermixed or whatever, however the timeline works out. Then we had all these front end frameworks, which we still have. We went from Knockout.js, and we had jQuery, and now today we have
Backbone
Angular,
JS.
Angular, React, blah 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 blah. Right? Name whatever you want to name. Right? But then now, if you look at them, like they're not talking about the same things we're talking about. Like they're not talking about WebSockets. They're not talking about server side rendering. Well, they are now again, but that's a different story. But before they weren't talking about that stuff. It was all let's run things in the client. And then now I feel like we're going back to this world where we're like doing both, right? Like we're trying to find what's the best mix between client development and like running and rendering in the client, and then having stuff run and render on the server. So as a person that, you create a framework around building web applications, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are around, I guess, the way that you've seen development of the thing, right? Like how, like I just want to put something on a browser, right? Like what am I supposed to use? How do I build it? And then how do folks kind of wrap their head around what are the important things for me to think about?
Yeah. So I think that just from a user experience perspective, the single page application architecture has such a great advantage over server-side rendering because of the responsiveness of the application is just far superior. So I don't see client-side user interface technology going away anytime soon, right? Whether that's JavaScript, whether that's WebAssembly, right? Whether that's WebSockets. I mean, I don't care about the technology under the covers that's driving the single page application, but it provides the best user experience for the user, right? It's and it comes down to just basic principles, right? You're just transferring a lot less information over the wire constantly. So of course it's faster. But I do see what, there's other trends as well. We went from everything being monolithic to everything being, microservice, client application front ends. And a lot of complexity has come into the development model because of that. I don't know, like if you're building, enterprise applications using microservices and, the modern techniques, setting up a local development environment is a total nightmare. And developers just don't even feel productive anymore in that environment, right? So it seems like we've gone far from being able to be productive in a lot of ways. And so I believe that the pendulum needs to swing back somewhat, because I also don't think we're delivering projects as quickly as we used to, right? And maybe the end result is a project that scales better in theory. Sometimes that's not the case, but the amount of time it took to get there is much higher. It just seems like the industry in general has allowed maybe the technical details to kind of push it too far into an over engineering direction. I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me, so like you think the pendulum needs to swing back. Sometimes I think the pendulum needs to stop swinging, and I say that, and I say, respectfully, I say that because it's swinging and we keep getting stuff, right? And I'm all about ideas and I'm all about innovation. But it gets to the point too that you never really get the chance to have that choice mature because we're already swinging back to the other thing, right? Again, like I bring up the whole WebSockets thing. I thought WebSockets was amazing. And I used to ask the question, why don't we send all traffic over WebSockets? Why not? Because if not, why not? Then why do we have it? Like, what's the point? Like, you know what I mean? Other than like those real-time stock tickers, which there's only so many people that are building those things. Like, why not? Like, why don't we just send everything over WebSockets? And again, I think this is relevant to the conversation because for the application framework you have, right? Like, as far as I understand, like it probably works on Blazor server, which uses WebSockets to like update the UI, right?
Yep,
So I'm like,
it does,
okay,
yep.
so now we have that kind of sort of, right? Like now we have, okay, well, all the traffic technically is going over WebSockets. I'm updating the UI based on some server rendered thing, but I'm not doing a full page reload. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But then
Yep.
again, you notice how like that is an example for me of like the pendulum swinging back, right? Because it's swinging back and it's going back to stuff that we already had, right? And now we're letting it mature. You know what I mean? But we need to sometimes we need to stop swinging a little bit and just let stuff mature so that we could get these things. And I think also when you think about the cognitive load for people, it's just like, okay, I know what HTML is, I know what CSS is, but now you just added like 100 other terms and like they keep changing. Like I don't know what that is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree.
That's my old man rant. This is me being an old man. Like I don't want any more of this.
Oh no, it's fine. I agree. I also think it's a little aspirational or a little bit of wishful thinking to think that the pendulum could ever stop, because I think if you take a step back, like the reason why the pendulum swings is because you'll build applications predominantly on the server side. I have it, and when that happens, eventually you'll reach some limitations, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, some new capabilities will become available on the client side. So everyone will go there for a while, right? And then the server in the meantime isn't staying the same; it's advancing as well. So it'll get more capabilities, and then it's just the nature of the beast, right? It's back and forth, and it's just innovation is going to push both sides, and it's never going to happen at exactly the same time.
Yeah. So with that being said, then I'd love to hear how Oqtane now like builds on top of some of these things. Like, what are some of those features that Oqtane will give us as .NET developers as we're building like these client-facing applications to hopefully give us, I'm guessing, some level of patterns or opinionated suggestions around like how we could do some of these things.
Yeah, so I guess I do have a few slides that I can probably refer to that help describe sort of some of these concepts better than I will.
Sure.
So maybe I'll pull those up.
Yeah, whenever you're ready, go ahead and share your screen. And for folks that are watching, feel free to go ahead and drop any questions you might have for Shaun, and then we'll make sure that we'll add those up. All right, Shaun, your screen is up right now.
All right, cool. All right, yeah. So application frameworks, right? That's what we like to refer to Oqtane as. Also, a modular application framework in particular, but application frameworks are designed to accelerate the development of applications, right? And provide, like you said, some standardized ways of building them and deploying them, and hopefully reducing the overhead. And modular applications are designed so that they can be broken up into independent pieces, right? That can be independently developed, independently deployed, and independently optimized. And there's a lot of different technologies that follow this sort of modular pattern. So Oqtane goal is to accelerate the development, right, of modern digital experiences. And it does so by providing a robust set of building blocks. And those building blocks, of course, leverage a lot of Microsoft-based technology that we're all familiar with. And of course, it's an open source application. So we talked a little bit about .NET Nuke versus Oqtane and sort of how they relate to one another. So from a concept perspective, both of them have a similar set of features in that they support multi-tenancy. They support modularity. They're composable, so you can dynamically create your user interface using a lot of different components. They're both open source, and they both provided like localization as a core capability. Of course, the difference here is on the .NET Nuke side, right? It was only capable of running on Windows. It is still based on the .NET framework. It only supported SQL Server as a backend database. It used web forms as its front-end technology. It was purely server-side, although as it evolved, people would leverage some JavaScript or front-end frameworks to create modules that had some single-page application characteristics. But for the most part, it was monolithic, and it would only cater to web development scenarios. Whereas Oqtane is cross-platform because it was built natively on .NET Core, which of course is cross-platform. It supports multiple databases natively. So right now it supports SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, and SQLite. It leverages the Blazor, and I guess I say Maui here, but it's really the Blazor hybrid approach. So it's really Blazor for the front-end technology. It uses the client-server architecture approach of single-page applications. It supports microservices, and it doesn't just run on the web, right? Using some of these newer capabilities, you can build desktop applications, you can build mobile applications as well. So I guess you would say that Oqtane has more capabilities than .NET Nuke ever had just because of the greater flexibility you have. From an architecture perspective, it's client-server, and it obviously leverages Blazor. So on the server side, it's obviously using .NET Core and EF Core as its sort of underlying technologies. And then on top of that, it has a bunch of APIs that it provides as well to provide capabilities which are not available natively and as part of like .NET Core, EF Core. And on the server side, it has the ability for you to build applications which have both a front end and a back end component to them. So you would have, a module-based API that you could build for a module, and then the front end would be built in Blazor, and they would be bundled up as a NuGet package and then deployed into your application. On the client side, one of the capabilities that Oqtane wanted to provide right from day one is being able to leverage all of the different Blazor hosting models. So yes, it supports Blazor Server, but it also supports Blazor WebAssembly and Blazor Hybrid. One of the architecture, I guess, decisions that was made early on was to create everything in a very clean sort of client-server method. And I've seen a lot of Blazor Server applications which are not developed in that way. And because of that, then it's not easy for them to transition to use some of the other hosting models. Well, everything in Oqtane was built in a client-server manner so that it works on all of the different hosting models. And it's interesting, because in .NET 8, Microsoft is talking about, the Blazor United, which I think it provides even more capability in the sense that you can mix and match the different hosting models even within the same page. But Oqtane, I think, is one of the few examples out there that actually allows you to run on all the hosting models currently. Although it doesn't really allow you to mix and match on the same page, it allows you to have a single installation where you can say that this site in my installation should use the Blazor Server hosting model, and this other site should use a Blazor WebAssembly hosting model, and maybe another one should use Blazor Hybrid. So it does have the ability to use all of the hosting models depending on what you want.
Gotcha. So really quickly, going back to that previous slide you just had. So I'm looking at this architecture and I'm wondering, so obviously you've made some decisions around how the app will be built, right? So as an example, there's a server there, which, if you do file new Blazor WASM, it's usually just a client thing. But so I'm guessing regardless of however you build your application, there will always be a server, right? Attached to that front end pushing bits back and forth. Is that fair for me to say?
Correct. Yeah, so you're right. From a framework perspective, there is, at least for the Oqtane framework itself, there is both a client and a server. Then when you want to extend it, so let's say you want to build a module. Your module that you build might only have a front end aspect to it, which leverages the Blazor capabilities to build components. And the back end of that module might be a microservice that exists somewhere else, right? So in that case, the module doesn't necessarily have both the client and server side to it, but it could. So you could also build it in such a way that it has both the client and server aspect to it, and then you would deploy it as such. And that module could store its data either in the same database that the Oqtane framework is installed in, or in a different database. I mean, you have a lot of flexibility depending on what you want to do.
Okay. Yeah, because I guess what I was trying to get out was, so I can build a client server application, I can build a client's application and a server application. So I have 3 different options. I can have both, one or the other, right?
Yep.
So that flexibility is there for folks that want to use Oqtane. So okay, so I just want to make sure that was clear.
Yeah. Multi-tenancy, I think, like, this is something that a lot of software developers would like as part of their application, the ability to, actually serve multiple needs out of the same, runtime application. And where .NET Nuke, I guess, it was multi-tenant, but it only supported either a dedicated multi-tenant model, where, of course, you would install the framework and you'd have a dedicated database, and it would be separated from everything else from a infrastructure perspective, or it supported a shared tenancy model where you could have one version of the framework installed, and then you could have many different clients virtually served from the same database. Like, so it'd be a shared database as well. Oqtane also has this sort of middle capability as well, where you can have the framework installed and that's all shared, but you can separate the databases for each tenant, which I guess in this sort of more modern world where you have more strict data governance rules, this is something that people find to be quite useful.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned earlier, it supports 4 databases. So from a security model perspective, the framework has obviously the client concerns, the server concerns, and natively it uses a backend for front-end approach for security. This security model, I think, has become a lot more popular maybe in the last 18 months, because for a while it seemed like all applications wanted to use JOT tokens, right, and wanted to avoid the use of cookies as much as possible. Backend for front end leverages cookies, and it leverages cookies for reasons that, I mean, if you want to investigate this further, you can look up online why backend for front end is one of the preferred models. But so Oqtane itself has its own local authentication and identity capabilities using, of course, the .NET Core identity service. But then it also has the ability to integrate with third-party identity providers as well. So you could use like Azure Active Directory, or whatever third party, as long as it supports OpenID or OAuth 2. You can basically use that for your external authentication.
So then I could use something like Identity Server from the Duende folks, or I think there's one called OpenDict, OpenDICT.
Yep, OpenID Dict.
Yeah. So I could use any of those, or hosted one, like you mentioned.
You could use those as well. Yeah. Often you don't even need those, though. If, like, for example, if I wanted to create an Oqtane site and I wanted to use Azure Identity, right, to provide the login capabilities for my site, I can totally do that, and I don't need to use any of those third-party components, right, to do that.
Got it. Okay.
That's good.
Yeah. So one of the philosophies in Oqtane is to minimize third-party dependencies as much as possible. And so when we added the support for identity providers, I didn't want to take another dependency on something like, OpenID Dict, or, the most popular ones that are out there, right? Because honestly, you don't really need them in a lot of cases. But I know that's probably, most people don't think in those terms. They think that I automatically need to use, Duende or something like that. And yeah, anyways.
Yeah.
So
Well,
the two different types.
it's interesting.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rodney.
I was saying it's interesting that you bring that up because I was working on a small little app with some OAuth stuff the other week and realized that all the libraries that exist out there in the world really are just a layer on top of the boilerplate stuff that's offered in .NET. And I can do everything from the stuff that .NET Core provides me, right? So I as a framework developer, like I understand that concept of, I don't want to take another dependency on some other thing to do this because it ties all of my users into consuming this thing that they don't need to be bothered with in order to do what they want.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was thinking, like, when it comes to the OpenID stuff, I think unless you're building an app that has like multiple clients from a same auth source, I guess maybe that would be the only reason you do. Like, if I'm building an app like Cecil's, I don't know, Cecil's Cookies, right? And it's a website, and I only have a website, then for me, OAuth and OpenID and those things just seem like too much, right? But then, you know what? Maybe I got a mobile app, and I got a desktop app, and I got this app and that app. You know what I mean? But then I want to use the same endpoints. You know what I mean? I don't want to build an endpoint or a different cert backend per client. So maybe at that point now it's like, okay, well, this client, you know what I mean? Like they all do like an OAuth thing because it's a centralized authentication system or whatever you call it, like SDS or whatever. But they're all going to one thing. Do you think you think that that's what makes sense when I have that multiple application scenario?
Yeah, there are some scenarios where yes, it does make sense to do that, and that's the scenario you just described would be one where you have all those different devices that are, I guess, in some ways sharing the same application.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah. So I guess obviously we have the Oqtane web client, which is using either Blazor WebAssembly or Blazor server. And then we've got the ability to support Blazor hybrid as well, which would be your Maui client, your desktop client, which also can still communicate with the same backend. And then you could even have external clients as well, because Oqtane does support authentication using JOT tokens as well.
Nice.
So it has its own sort of token server that's built into it, which again, like Rodney said, that's, you can easily build those things using just standard .NET, right?
Yeah.
It's not that complicated.
Yeah,
It's not.
That makes sense.
And I guess, so the big capability that was released in the fall was, Oqtane had always supported web. Of course, it could support mobile as sort of in the hybrid form of mobile previously, like a, progressive web application.
Mm-hmm.
But with the addition of Blazor hybrid, and the connection into Maui, of course, it can support sort of more of a native mobile approach now, as well as a desktop approach. So you can build. I guess this is kind of the cool thing is, you can build a module in Oqtane, so a single code base, and that code base can run on mobile, web, or desktop, right? So it can run in all three hosting models without any conditional logic in the code, without any, need to recompile the code, right? Like it's literally, it would be the same application that runs on all of the different platforms, which is, I think that's something a lot of developers have wanted for a long time. So there's always the naysayers which would say, oh, well, you can't achieve, they're truly like native user interface nuances, right? If you take that approach.
Who cares?
And maybe that's true, but you can save a whole lot of time and money by building something that works well on all three platforms using the same application.
So this is a really big sell, right? Because I think you hit the nail, right? This is what we as application developers in the .NET space have been requesting for years. This is what I feel like the entire .NET Core trip was about, was being able to write my application one time in one code base and deploy it to any target that I need to. And what it sounds like is with the Oqtane framework, you've made that kind of minimal for me, the developer, to invest into, right? All I have to do is spin up Oqtane, use the bits, create my own modules, and off I have my own app that can target mobile, desktop, and web, which is 100% of the surface that we need to reach users. So this sounds like you are making good on the promise of .NET Core.
Yeah, and to be fair, I'm leveraging the capabilities that Microsoft has provided with Blazor.
Right.
I think the interesting thing with Blazor is that even though Microsoft has provided these capabilities, they haven't really packaged it up in a way that pushes that makes it really obvious that you can do these things with it.
Right.
It's the way that they describe it. It's sort of a hypothetical, like you might be able to, but no, like literally you can.
You can.
And I think that the reason why they're holding back from saying that you can is because they still internally have some challenges to work out around the messaging of the different products, right? Of course, they have Maui, which is, independent from Blazor Hybrid, right? And Blazor. And so I think that they might want more developers to use native Maui for building applications, right? That would be the logical progression from Xamarin, right? Is to use native Maui. Right. But everything I'm talking about here is actually not Maui at all. It's Blazor. So it can get a little bit confusing, I think, for developers because there's too many options in the .NET ecosystem.
Right.
But I feel like that's always been the case, right? I mean, if you look back to there is or was WinUI and UWP and WPF, at least when it comes to the desktop side, and then even on the website, right? There's Razor Pages, there's MVC, there's Blazor, you see what I'm saying? Like there's always been a lot of options.
Yep.
And I'm agreeing with you 100%, right? Like it becomes a question of, okay, well, wow, like what do I choose? Like just tell me what to pick. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and Microsoft can say, well, tell me what your requirements are.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's kind of the beauty of it, right? Is that what are my requirements? My requirements may not be mobile intensive, right? But I still need a mobile client. And this is an option, right? I may not need all of the background services and everything like that may or may not be harder to get in this world, right?
Yeah.
If I need that native experience, I go write it in a native experience and I have options there. I think what I like about the fact that Microsoft isn't giving us a prescription here for how to do these things is it's allowing for people like yourself to come up with your own formula. Hey, this is a way that I think you can achieve this. This is the way my brain approached this problem. If you like it, use it. If you don't, come up with your own because no one is boxing us in. I think the biggest problem that I've found with Microsoft developers is once Microsoft says this is the way to do it,
that's the only way to do it.
That's the only way to do it. So I'm actually enjoying the fact that folks like yourself are coming up with new and innovative ways to push the limits of what Microsoft is giving us.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, like, there are obviously other solutions that exist, right, that are doing a good job about this multi-device, multi-platform capability, right? Like Uno platform does a good job of it. Avalonia does a good job of it. So there is multiple options that are out there, right, that are independent from Microsoft that are trying to solve this problem in the .NET space as well.
Right.
Maybe it would be a good time to transition over to Visual Studio.
Yeah, I'd love to see some code about how this stuff works.
Right.
And I can tell you, like, off the top of my head, there's two things that I'm already thinking about. Is one, like, what kind of templates do you have? Like, what's the file new Oqtane template thing look like? And I'm also really curious about these modules that I've been seeing in the slides.
Okay. So obviously the Oqtane framework itself is a GitHub project. And so You can find all the code online. We're up to release 3.3.1 currently, so we've had 26 releases since the beginning. So we've tried to be pretty active about pushing out new releases. The one thing, I guess, which is different about Oqtane than what you're than what most .NET Core, I guess, developers are used to, is there is no file new project template. So there is a few, like obviously you can pull down the source code from GitHub and it has the full framework application, or there is also some packages which you can download as well.
So is it kind of set up similar to how like .NET Nuke was? Like it wasn't a thing that you went into Visual Studio to create, right? You went into this .NET Nuke world and that was how you did things.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there still is like an install package and an upgrade package. So these are packages that you can use to install an application into like an IIS instance or, into Azure or, whatever. These are, installable applications. I have the latest code from Oqtane locally here, which would be, from the dev branch. So basically you have, client project, server project, and shared project. This is like the standard, I guess, approach that you would see if you created like a Blazor application, a Blazor WebAssembly application, right? Where it has, cleanly defined projects for client, server, and shared. Your client would be all your client components, server would be any server concerns, and then the shared would be your models that are shared between the two. This was the approach, I think, that was, in the templates at the early stages of Blazor. I think that the templates have changed over time and may not represent this exact approach anymore. But I think it still makes sense to have this sort of clean separation between the projects. If I go into my server project and I go into my app settings, I don't have a connection string set up yet, which is good. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run the application. And by doing so, it's going to, obviously start up the app. It's going to recognize that there's no database, no master database that's been configured. And it gives me an installation wizard, which I can use to install the application interactively. So I got to give it some account information so that I'll be able to log into the application afterward. And so once I click install, it's going to run a whole bunch of, it's going to create my database for me, which I chose to use just a local DB instance. It's going to run all my migrations for me to set up all of the different backend services that I need. And it actually creates an initial site for me. So basically this is like the default content that's created for your initial site. And it has a few different pages in it. So like typical kind of like a home page for your site, a private page, which I can only see because I'm logged in. It's got the ability to set up like a portal where each user can have, personalized pages for themselves and add content to them and edit that content. And then here it also has this module creator. And this is what developers can use to actually scaffold new modules. So you basically give it a few pieces of information. So basically, who's the owner of the module, what does the module do, a little description. There's only one default template that's provided, and you say create module, and it'll spit out a full set of code for the module. And so I can show you that if I go into an example here. So this is an example module that was originally created from that template. Mm-hmm. This module is used for managing actually, it basically goes out to GitHub every day, captures metrics for all of the .NET Foundation projects, and then provides a dashboard for them. But it scaffolded out the solution, all of the projects, all of the components that are part of the project, all of my, all of my backend controllers, my my repositories, and all of my models. So basically, just by filling out that little bit of information, it'll scaffold out everything that you need to create a fully functional module, which you can then open in Visual Studio. You can compile. And then the way that this works is that it also has this package project. So when you compile, what happens is, let's say I compile in debug mode, it will automatically copy the DLLs for this particular project that are compiled into my Oqtane instance, so that when I run Oqtane, it'll be able to recognize that those DLLs exist. It'll interrogate them for various interfaces and things, and it'll be able to also run any migrations they contain. And so basically, it automates the process of bootstrapping the module and gets them up and running.
Here's a quick question for you, just based on looking at this. Like, this looks like DOS commands. Like, what about folks that run on non-Windows based machines? Does it detect, and like, would it generate like a bash script or something, or like, how would that work?
It actually does not. So yeah, if you use this approach and you're actually developing on non-Windows, then these scripts do not work, and you actually have to do some manual effort to
do it. Maybe like a PowerShell script or something.
Yeah, you could. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's a good point. I mean, honestly, to improve the developer experience for people who are like using Linux or Mac, I guess, there certainly could be some more work done there. Also, that file new experience that you talked about, I think it would be theoretically possible to create like a very minimal bootstrapped project template that could still then run the Oqtane framework through it. And so I think that's actually on my list of things that needs to be explored.
Yeah. I think maybe even at least PowerShell, because PowerShell does run cross-platform. You know what I mean?
Yes, it
as
does.
a scripting language. So that could be like a good middle ground versus creating a script per environment type thing.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, because right now you're right. This is focused on Windows, so it copies like the necessary things so that you can debug. On release, it actually executes a command so that it creates the NuGet packages for you as well and deploys them where they will be installed and packaged.
Okay.
So yeah. So this is
talk about that real quick, right? Because I have minimal experience with .NET Nuke. I worked next to the team that used it at a company years ago. So I got to see it, but I never worked directly with it.
Yep.
So as I'm understanding this, right? So you installed the Oqtane framework into a web host somewhere locally.
Yep.
And then you use the Oqtane framework web host to create a module, which actually goes out and creates these .NET projects. And then from there, you change the module how you see fit, and the module spits out and copies a NuGet package back into Oqtane for it to exercise.
Correct. Yeah.
So you're kind of like doing a lot of stuff here for the user, but it's a very interesting approach to how to consume modules, because you're basically just creating a NuGet package that gets exercised by your framework.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is it's like, so there's the framework itself, and of course we don't really encourage people to modify the code of the framework, because if you do that, then you basically are on your own sort of fork, right? And you wouldn't be able to take advantage of newer versions. So we encourage people to build their modules and their themes and that as external projects, with and leveraging Oqtane as a dependency so that you can leverage the APIs that are part of it. At runtime, through the configuration, all of this is brought together, meaning the framework loads up your modules and your themes, and then through configuration, it will inject all of that into the various pages that you've defined. So everything is dynamic. There is no, like the home page, there's no home.razor, right? This is all constructed dynamically based on configuration.
Yeah.
That is nice. That's some next level stuff right there. I really enjoy.
Yeah. And so the cross-cutting concerns, right? It does have like like user management built in, profile management for users, role management. It's got its own file manager, so you can define folders and who's allowed to see the files that are in those folders and who's allowed to upload to those folders. It's got URL mappings for like broken links and mapping broken links to appropriate places. It can track visitors if you're interested in knowing like who's visiting your site. It's got an event log, like where you can see any events that are happening, any significant events that are happening in the application would be logged to the event log, and you have access to that.
What is that event
Visually.
log based on? Like, what is it plugged into? Is it like a custom database, or is it using like app insights and open telemetry and like all that other fancy stuff?
No, it's storing that in the Oqtane database.
Okay.
In a log table. It's using Serolog concepts, but it stores logs per site because this is like we're looking at one site here, but this instance is multi-tenant. I could actually create additional sites that are independent, and they could even be in like each site could have their own database, and then the event log would be per database, right?
Got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then it's got the ability to have scheduled jobs as well, so you can create scheduled jobs that run in the background using like the I-hosted service capability within .NET Core.
Nice.
Yeah, and that's obviously what the DNF projects is using to get information from GitHub on a daily basis.
Yeah.
It's got a SQL manager so that you can actually execute SQL commands against your various
you can
databases.
change the connection string. That's interesting.
That's nice.
Yeah. Yeah, so a lot of these cross-cutting things, right, are built in. Things that, you know, you would typically probably need to build yourself or rely on more archaic methods to access. A lot of that's built in for you. And so this would be like some of the gaps that Oqtane fills that is not available, right, just by using the standard, you know, .NET Core or Blazor.
So to me, this is like the CMS aspect of it, right? Like it gives me all of the tools that I need to deliver an actual application without having to build each component myself. And because you're delivering it to me in a framework, it's the same across every site that I use with Oqtane. So now it's comfortable for me to skill people up on. Like it becomes more of a cookie cutter. Let's build some functionality versus, hey, let's build a website, right?
Yep, that's exactly like, yeah, definitely. It's all about trying to minimize the amount of sort of more mundane plumbing stuff that you have to do and just focusing on the specific domain applications that you need to build for clients.
Yeah.
This is pretty cool. So I'm curious about like the scope of modules, right? So I'm guessing when you think about a module, and I'm guessing like that dashboard that you showed or the admin panel, I'm guessing each of those items is a module. I'm guessing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's right.
So then a module can pretty much just do anything, right? Like there's no limitation or scope to the capabilities of modules.
Correct. Yeah. So so as an example on this home screen here, there is one module that's included with the framework called the HTML text module, right? And it's for allowing you to manage rich text type of content. And so this block here is a module, but a module is simply just a grouping of Razor components, right? So this has a Razor component which displays the main view. And if I go into edit mode and I go into edit, it will display this is an edit component that's related to the same module, but allows an authenticated user, right, to manage the content as in a rich text editor or as raw.
Nice.
And so, so modules can have as many different components as you need, right? So this one only has two components, right? A sort of a view for the front and then an edit. But you could have many, many different components that would all be part of that same module instance, right? Yeah, so you have a lot of flexibility there. But you're right. This is an HTML module. If I went to this module creator, this is in fact a module as well. If I go to like site settings, right, this is a module as well. So there, everything is essentially a module.
So then, with that being the case, then thinking about a little bit more of a complicated scenario, can I have modules that are dependent on other modules? Like, can modules talk to each other and like discover each other and say, let's say I had a module that had like a shopping cart or had some payment functionality. Could like my front page module be like, hey, if this thing is here, go get this information from that module and I'll display it. Is that a thing that happens, or is that?
So Oqtane does have support for events. Okay. So if I had like a couple of components that were on the same page, there's ways that you can communicate between them using events. Mm-hmm. There's also events that are available that you can send between the front end and the back end, so between the client and the server. Okay. And then there's also events that you can raise between server components as well. So you got events in every direction that are available to you.
That makes sense.
Nice.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. This is good stuff. I mean, I like I said, I remember .NET Nuke when I first saw it, and now knowing that there's a Blazor more modern approach to doing the same thing that gets into the whole concept of, you know, going all the way back around to the beginning. We talked about open source sustainability, right? Like, you created this thing years ago, the need is still here, but now it needs to be in a completely different space and time because web applications have changed, and you're able to bring it forward into the new world.
Yeah, and realistically, there would be no way to provide an upgrade path, I don't think, for .NET Nuke, right? Because it's just, at least not in a compatible way.
Yeah.
Because the technology has changed too much over time.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's why I had to start from scratch with something new. I guess the other thing is, like, so we're talking about modules, but I mean, you can also change the look and feel, right? With something with themes, and themes are, again, just Razor components. Like, so this background with all the Chrome and the menu, that's just another Razor component. I mean, I can show you some examples of like this is the Oqtane website at octane.org, right? And this has a very different look to it, but I mean, it's just using a standard Bootstrap template to create a very sort of modern looking theme, right? And so this is again just using Razor components. And in fact, here's another good example here. Like, so this site actually still has a logo and a navigation and, you know, log in, log out. This is a site I created where it has like no navigation, right? It's simply a dashboard that exists online. Nice. Right? So it has no navigation, no login, log out. And this just keeps track of like NHL hockey statistics. And it has a huge database behind it because it has, you know, tons of data that it collects every day.
So then, would you say then that Oqtane, I could pretty much build any type of .NET application using Oqtane? Pretty much, right?
Yeah,
like if I did file new project, like I should file new project Oqtane, and then now I can build my stuff on top of that, right? And there's no limitations in terms of like the type of application. More so just me trying to figure out what's the right combination of modules to put together to get my end result. Yeah?
Correct. That's right.
Yep.
Yeah, there's really no limitation on what you could build. Like, you can make it look however you want, and you can add whatever functionality that you want.
Got it.
Yeah. This is nice.
Yeah. So now I'm thinking, okay, so we spent about half an hour. We spent the first half an hour talking about open source stuff, but we spent about half an hour or so talking about Oqtane and, you know, what it could do. So for folks that are like, okay, great, I love it, this is awesome, I want to try it out, is there a place that they could go to see docs, samples? I don't know, maybe there's like a showcase thing or anything like that. Like where could folks really go and see how can I get started and like what can I do with this thing?
Yeah, so that's always like the challenge with open source projects is availability of
Sure.
documentation and examples. There is a documentation site for Oqtane, but it doesn't have, like, it has API level documentation based on the comments that are in the code.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have tutorial based documentation, right?
Got it.
Unfortunately, there just hasn't been much from the community in terms of contributions in that area.
So that's an opportunity. Anybody that's listening, you can go ahead and go out there and get in touch with Shaun, and I'm sure he'll be glad to get you started on helping him create some content.
Yeah, it's actually at docs.oqtane.org, I think. Yeah. And so,
okay.
But yeah. Yeah. So, but mostly, I mean, it's the API documentation, which is filled out.
Which
is still useful. Good. But yeah.
Okay. But is there like a pre-done sample maybe? Because, even though if they're not docs, I could look at a sample and I could, figure it out a little bit. Is there like anything?
Yeah, there is. So if you wanted to find a sample, there's sample modules. I mean, if you scaffold a module like I showed you from within the framework, right, you'll have a fully working module with all of the code, which is a great example, a great place to get started.
Yeah.
There is a blog module that was originally created using that scaffolding capability, but I mean, it's a fully functional blog module. Actually, it's in use on the site here. So
nice.
All of my blogs are published on here.
Nice.
Which has got like pages and search, and if I want to go in and take a look here, yeah. So that's a fully functional module. This site here, built on Blazor, was something I created last year because I thought that it would be useful to have a showcase site for different Blazor sites. This is actually running on Oqtane, but built on Blazor, it tells you like what hosting model it's using, like whether it's server or WebAssembly.
Yeah.
Captures a screenshot. And I mean, not a lot of these sites look great, unfortunately, at least at the resolution where it's capturing the screenshots.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of interesting examples here of sites that are for retail, for government, for various things that are all using Blazor. Because I think that was one of the challenges. This is taking a step back. Like when I created Oqtane, I made a pretty big bet that Blazor was going to be something that Microsoft was going to invest in, right? And that there was going to be a life to it. And I think a lot of developers in the early stages of Blazor didn't believe that, right? They thought it was the next Silverlight, and they thought it would be like killed. Yeah. And so they basically stayed away from it. So maybe if I had built Oqtane using Angular or React, it might have become more popular more quickly. But then again, there's probably a lot of other really good frameworks, like meta frameworks, right, that are built on React or Angular already. So Oqtane has its niche, right? It focused on Blazor. And I think that over the last 5 years, Microsoft has shown commitment to this technology, right? Continues to get better, and they continue to make sure it has good integration story with like all of the new things that are coming out.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But some people are still staying away from it.
I mean, I'm sure there's reasons for that we could probably have another very long conversation about too. But Shaun, this has been great, man. Again, definitely appreciate you spending some time with us today and showing us Oqtane. I know for sure I definitely want to try it out. Like I'm already thinking about things that I could do with like our Stripe API and payments, and maybe there could be like some interesting scenarios there that might be great for folks to try out.
Yeah, so you're the Stripe guy. So I might want to pick your brain on that, because one of the things that is on, well, it's mostly built out. So there is a capability in Oqtane for people to build extensions, obviously, right? Whether it's themes or modules, and they can host those on GitHub or on NuGet. And there's a capability in the framework itself where you can browse what's available and you can download directly into your instance and install, right?
Oh.
Much like other CMSs do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And so I would like to create a commercial marketplace, and I want to use Stripe as the back-end payment provider for that.
Oh, sure. Well, we can definitely talk about that if you'd love to. I might know a person or two or 100. I can help you out with that.
Yeah.
Awesome. That sounds great, man.
That's something that has to happen this year.
Okay. Yeah. Well, for sure. Let's talk about it. We could definitely see what we could do to help you out with that.
Cool.
But again, Shaun, thank you so much for being here. And then for everyone that's still watching, thank you all for staying with us. Definitely make sure you check out Oqtane. I'm going to put the link at the bottom of the screen, so in case you didn't see it before, like here it is. Try it out in your projects, and kind of like what Shaun said, right? Like they're on GitHub. It's open source. Feel free to send pull requests and share your feedback.
Yeah.
Right. Help them write some documentation, because that's always helpful.
Always helpful.
Yeah, and again, like let them know what your feedback is. Let them know what you build, and let's just try and
I should have probably mentioned that for tutorials, actually. So you've had Michael Washington on your show, I think, recently.
Yeah, he was on. He did Chat GPT with us.
Okay, I've known Michael for a long time. He was in the .NET Nuke community, and he's created some good tutorials for Oqtane, actually.
Oh, has he? Okay.
Yeah, he's an amazing writer, like content presenter, like yeah. So really appreciate what he does.
Okay, I'm gonna go bug Michael on Twitter and ask him for the good stuff that he's been to. Cool. Well, all right, folks. Well, again, thank you so much, and we'll see you all next time on Insight.net. Bye, everybody.